Order this joint workshop of the City Commission and Historic Preservation Board. Today is January 28th, 2025. It is 4 p.m. Let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands,
one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
City Clerk, if you'll please do a roll call.
Member Hurley. Present. Member Young.
Yes.
Member Hawkinsmith. Yes. Member Dashiell.
Yes.
Chair Lowry.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Mulholland.
Here.
Commissioner Marriott.
Here.
Commissioner Robinson.
Here.
Mayor Petrilla.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. All right.
Get us started. Good afternoon, Brandon Berry, planner. If we could pull up the PowerPoint. So we're addressing two divisions of the Land Development Code today. Division 20, which is the Pass Grill, what will be named the Pass Grill Historic Overlay District, currently the Pass Grill Overlay District, and Division 40, which is the Community Redevelopment District, 8th Avenue. This comprises the properties of all of the zoning of all the properties along 8th Avenue, several extending up to 9th and down to 7th Avenues. Community Redevelopment District, 8th Avenue is the actual zoning of those properties, and the Division 20 Pass Grill Overlay District is the overlay on top of what is primarily residential zoning. City also has a division that deals specifically with historic preservation. This largely addresses designation of properties, how historic properties are managed, and how additions and other modifications to structures are handled. That is not directly addressed through any of these amendments. We have not proposed any changes to Division 28. There are minor modifications in Division 20 that address a type of administrative or certificate of appropriateness waiver for certain setback variances in the Pass Grill overlay, but there are no direct changes to the city's historic preservation ordinance. So these amendments reflect what's now coming up on a 3-year process to better align the district standards with the purpose and intent. The Pass Grill overlay was adopted in 1999. It was majorly amended back in 2017. And the board, as well as staff, have proposed and worked on these amendments to help better preserve existing bona fide historic structures, develop new structures that are compatible with the area, and respect the unique pre-zoning character of Pass Grill. The intent of these amendments are to provide a more robust design standards with qualified review by a city architect or by staff led by a guidebook, and prevent unfettered lot consolidation that does not respect historic layout and character. So looking at the Pass Grill Overlay District, Division 20, some of the major changes include building to the overlay is now a requirement in the code for lots of a certain size. The applicant has the ability to build to either the underlying the standard suburban zoning district or to the overlay, which allows for reduced setbacks and some other benefits in exchange for building to a design that respects the massing and scale of the district. Building to the overlay would now be a requirement that tends to be the option that most developers undertake now anyway, but it would be a requirement. This strengthens standards for design review. Design standards would need to be identified on plans. There would be an architect review for those who choose to move forward with a design that is not guided by the guidebook, which is something that we're working on that'll be forthcoming, and that'll be prepared for when we bring this back for the final readings. For those who decide to design outside of the guidebook, there would be an architect review of those plans. There would be a requirement for driveway access to be in the rear of properties when they abut an alleyway of 15 feet or greater. Currently, access is allowed from any zone. There is a requirement that structures be set a certain distance from the front property line, so there may not be actual parking on the exterior of the building, but we do currently allow for driveways to be established in the front of structures. The concern with that is we are losing a lot of our alleyway parking because of that. Property owners are choosing to develop lots and run driveways off the front of the lot. So the historic board and staff have discussed a requirement for driveways to be set in the rear of the structure when the alleyway is greater than 15 feet. Any kind of lot consolidation or subdivision would require Historic Preservation Board review. This is currently a requirement for City Commission review. It would come forward to the Historic Board for recommendation prior to proceeding to City Commission. And this would prevent any kind of accessory structure from being established in the front yard. We currently have what is called an accessory structure envelope. It does prevent, or it does require certain front setbacks for accessory structures, but it doesn't require actually placing them behind the residence. This would require that based on both the required front setbacks of the building types as well as just an explicit requirement for them to be set behind the home. Looking at the CRD 8th Avenue, this would include design standard implementation similar to the Paso Grill overlay. There are currently no design standards on 8th Avenue for new development. We have several locally designated historic structures and a handful that are potentially eligible for national designation. We want to ensure that the design standards for new development reflect and respect the character of 8th Avenue. We are not changing the maximum height for the avenue from what is currently 35 feet, but we are clarifying that any structure built with an at-grade flood-proofed bottom floor, that 35 feet would start from grade. For those structures that are elevated, where the first habitable floor is elevated above grade, 35 feet would still start at the base flood elevation, as it does for commercial properties elsewhere in the city. However, there would be a requirement that above that 35 feet above grade, that top floor step back a handful of feet just to provide some consistency in the avenue. There would be a requirement for screening of rooftop mechanical equipment that is currently in place in Paso Grill. It would be implemented on 8th Avenue as well. All new development would go through a design review, the same as the Paso Grill overlay. And there would be a new maximum building length of 80 feet. That's to respect the historic layout of the CRD 8th Avenue district, to ensure that structures respect that character. It prevents any kind of developer coming in and purchasing multiple properties and developing a building that doesn't respect that character. And the Historic Preservation Board would also review any lot consolidation that occurs on 8th Avenue. This was brought to the Planning Board back in September. They made some great recommendations. Most of the modifications were related to grammar and clarification. We added definitions for base flood elevation, design flood elevation, and required design flood elevation. Added guidelines for setbacks relative to adjacent properties, specifically for properties that are eligible for a certificate of appropriateness waiver for setbacks. Removed the common yard landscaping standards as an allowable secondary frontage. Allowed for on-street parking to count toward required parking only when it is available without reservation. The city currently allows for, in the Paso Grill overlay, on the limited commercial lots that are available, counting parking within a 500-foot radius. We wanted to make sure that that pertains only to metered parking and other parking that's available to the general public, that it doesn't count avenue parking and other that's limited solely to residents. Height in the CRDEA is to be measured from grade when the first floor is constructed at grade, as mentioned previously. And this provides some cleanup and relocation language for balconies, marquees, arcades, some of those other features that are specific to 8th Avenue. So that is all staff has. We have on Teams our consultant, Tara Salmieri. She's been involved since the start of this process in helping us with this code cleanup. She was also responsible for the 2017 overlay amendments. Chair, did you have any comments you wanted to make? No? Okay. So we really just wanted to bring this forward to get your general input. If there's anything significant that you feel that staff's either leaving out, if there's any major clarifying questions that you have for us. Like I said, this has been a multi-year process. It's gone through multiple iterations. We will take this back to Historic Board after this meeting. It'll proceed through the typical channels on the Planning Board, and then for 2 readings with City Commission. We believe there are a few tweaks I know that we've talked about with the Historic Board, but it's largely in a place that we feel it's ready to move forward if the Commission does as well.
Okay. Commissioners, questions, comments? Mr. Mulholland, since this is your district, do you want to?
Right, I believe most of the boards from my district as well. Yeah, I've been following this, and I've had some conversations with Ms. Daschle, and I've had considerable conversations with the chair over the past many months. Specific to what we have here today, I think just 2 points of clarification. First, the 35 feet from grade or 35 feet basically above, let's say, a parking garage. Is that what we're talking about here? Something along those lines? And effectively, at that point, the building would potentially be 45 feet plus or minus. Would that be correct?
Based on the flood zone for most of the properties on 8th Avenue, I believe it would be more in the range of 40 feet when you get up to that height. So if the ground level were to be not flood proofed, if there were to be an elevation, it would allow for that 35 feet to start at base flood elevation, but it wouldn't necessarily be the top of the parking garage. If the top of the parking garage is 9 feet, they would start at 5 feet above grade, and then the habitable floors could be 30 to 31 feet to compensate.
So humor me and tell me what you think the tallest building could possibly be there. Understanding the top floor has to have a 10-foot setback, would that be correct?
That's correct, and that would be particularly for those structures that don't start that measurement at grade. So any elevated structure that obtains that additional 5 feet, the top floor would need to be set back 10 feet. I don't have an exact measurement, but I would think it would be around 41 feet above grade if someone were to take advantage of that standard.
Okay, so not 45, but closer to 40.
Correct, yes.
You're not certifying that, but that's your educated opinion.
So-
And then the other thing, and I spoke to the chair about this, and, he may want to jump in. So 15-foot alleys, is that maybe a little wide for people to be required to have their parking on the rear of the home as opposed to a curb cut in the front or the like? Has there been any discussions on something smaller like 12 feet or anything like that? Is that feasible, plausible, or?
Yeah, if I can jump in. Yeah, we talked about that, and just so everybody understands, I don't know how familiar you are with Pastor Grill and going down there, but the oldest section of Pastor Grill, like south of 10th or 11th, there's parking on both sides of the street. And none of the houses had driveways in the front yard forever.
Right.
Because there was alleys. Everybody parked in the back and used the alleys, and that made the front yards nice and clean. There wasn't a car parked there. There was landscaping. You had your front porch there that was unobstructed. In the last, I don't know how many years, let's say the last 20 years or so, I don't really know, but I would guess there might be 3 or 4 new houses that have built down there, and they've got curb cuts in front of their house. So they have a garage that faces the street. They got cars that park in the front yard, and even more importantly, they take away parking on the street, which is very well, we have a problem with that, especially in that area. So we've kind of felt that we need to be telling people, or you need to make it a rule essentially, or ordinance, that they have to, if they're on an alley, and not every lot is, if they're on an alley, they need to use that to put their cars behind the house, like the historic nature of Pastor Grill. Now, with that being said, houses on the water don't have alleys. A lot of houses north of 20th don't have alleys. So it's not the whole place, okay? And as you get north of 12th, there's parking on one side of the street. Why they pick which side, I don't know. So all of those houses that are on the side where there's parking, they have to go and use the alleys, which makes sense. And all the houses on the other side apparently don't have to use their alleys, even though they have alleys, and they have a bunch of curb cuts in the front. And so a lot of new homes we're seeing are getting curb cuts even though they're on alleys. Just last meeting, we had a house that's actually on 2 alleys, a north-south and an east-west, but they're building their house with the garages facing the street because they can under the rules we currently have. And but to go more specifically what Mr. Mulholland said, most of the alleys are platted at 15 feet. So that's good, but some are platted like at 10. So if I think what Mr. Mulholland and I were talking about, if we make a rule that says it's 15 feet, then if you're on an alley with 10 feet, we've basically given someone permission to do a curb cut in front of their house, okay? 10 feet is plenty wide for a car to get down. It's not two-way traffic on an alley. I think there was some concern about the turning radiuses, and we never really kind of got to that point because, frankly, we picked the 15 feet because that made the most sense at the time. We looked at or I requested to find out some of the alley widths, and that's when we found out that some were less than 15 feet.
I think we did take into consideration some navigational standards as well. I think Tara shared those with us, and that's why we kind of ultimately landed at 15.
But I would request, I mean, and we can talk about it, you know, further if we need to with Tara and stuff. I think we should make it 10 feet and then just see how that, if that really affects things. Because, for example, the one block where I know it's 10 feet, the houses on it's an east-west alley, and the houses on the north side of that alley, the new ones all have curb cuts, all right? On the houses on the south side, which are all old houses, they park behind the house. So you can navigate that 10-foot alley, and it's been that way historically. So I don't think we should be, I think we should make it 10 feet rather than 15 feet. And just so I can throw the whole thing out there, you know, we've had issues with garbage pickup and things of that nature that kind of got put on the back burner with the storm we had. But I think having more of a requirement to use the alley would spur the city to maintain the alleys much more than they have been in the past, because that's been a continuous problem. So if we're suggesting that people really need to utilize those alleys, and again, I go back to Paso Grill was platted as a pre-car island, okay? And so the alleys were put in there for a purpose, to put everything in the back there. And if we want to maintain the historical look, that's a key feature. So I think that's very important on the alleys. And you know, we kind of got away from that, of course, and then as a result, alleys start suffering because people aren't using them much, they get overgrown, they aren't maintained, et cetera, et cetera. So I do think that changing it to this and making it a requirement will uplift the whole community and not just the people that are on the. I live down there. I don't live on an alley, so I'm not, you know, trying to. I take my garbage out in the front yard, all that kind of stuff. So this isn't a personal thing. It's just if you walk those streets and alleys, like I have for many, many years, you recognize that that's an integral part of the historic nature of Paso Grill. So that's the long version.
So
there
is
any-
there a reason why 10-foot couldn't work, or?
And Tara, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we did kind of settle on 15 feet. I think when we talked about 10 feet, the only concern was relative to some of the rear setback permissions that we have in the overlay. It just makes it a little bit of a challenge to navigate a larger car into a garage, especially one set 5 feet from the alley. Can you think of any other concerns that a required access from a 10-foot alleyway would pose?
Good afternoon, Tara Salmeri, Plan Active Studio. Originally, you know, the original 15 feet was because that was the predominant alleyway. I think that you can add the provision of 10 feet, but it would have to be reviewed, and the turning radius, it would have to be per review of that particular plan. It will be a challenge if you have a garage 5 feet from the alley to turn into the garage. Generally, you would probably need another 5 feet. You know, I go 2.5 to 5 feet for a vehicle to turn into their driveway and then back out. That's just but I think you could also add a footnote that you could review that. If it was the will of the decision makers to do that, we could take a look at how many are less than 15 feet too.
Do we know how many are less than 15 feet?
Yeah, if we could pull up the overhead. Here at a map, there's a few alleyways north of here, and it's a little bit hard to make out the colors there, but looking north from 12th, primarily most of the alleyways are 15 feet. South of that is 18, generally north-south. It's the east-west alleys that would require that parking from the rear if this were to be implemented, reduced down to 10 feet. So looking south of 12th, the east-west alleys. So those parcels on the avenues would need to access from the rear of the property instead of the avenue side.
So we're looking at a total of, looks like 5 alleys that are,
And I'm sorry, Brandon, so are we saying what east-west alleys do we know are 10 feet, or we don't really know that?
First up to around 12th, I believe. The east-west alleys are 10 feet, platted at 10 feet. They may be maintained at more, but
Yeah, and if that's the case, everyone uses them. So, it hasn't really been a problem.
I mean, is there,
Attorney Reyes says now, and I will just say this, I realize it's a different world we live in than 100 years ago or whatever, but, even, I believe, I'm not 100%, there's some new houses that still park on the alley in that area, but that's a very, everyone, or those people park in the street, which they're allowed to do, but that's different than having garage facing the street. And so, I think what Tara said makes a lot of sense from the standpoint that we can't be draconian and just say, oh, sorry, you're on a 10-foot lot, you can't do that. But I do think we should have some consistency and not just set it at 15 feet. Maybe we say 15 feet. If you're less than 15 feet, however the language you'd want to do, you can come in front of the historic board and then or whatever, however you want to work it, with the commission to see if you can get a variance to do that. But it would still put the onus on the property owner to have to try to do that, as opposed to us just saying, go ahead and do it, and I think that would be a much wiser way to go to try to maintain that look. Because I can tell you right now, what people are going to do, and they have been doing on these small lots, is they build max plus. And that was part of the reason we're going to talk about getting rid of the choice between the overlay. Everyone builds the overlay anyway, pretty much. And it's just, people want down to come and want to build every square inch. They want an amenity that they would have in Apollo Beach or something, but it's down in a historic district. And so if we want to maintain that look, we have to limit some of that.
sure, so again, what's wrong with just saying 15 feet? If it's less than 15 feet, you have to go before the Board of Adjustment and request a variance, or the historic board, whichever.
I don't think there's any problem with that if you
No.
all think that would be the way to
That
go.
seems to be the simplest solution,
Yeah.
most straightforward. That way that gives you the ability to do a site review or
Exactly.
something else. Okay.
And I think that encompasses the fact that if you're going to put an alley access on the back, that may change your rear yard setbacks for any structures that abut that rear property line, and fencing too, it could make a difference, so.
And I'll say this because I know this is an issue, people that spend a lot of money on a lot down in Pass Grove when they didn't used to, 30 years ago, a lot of people want a swimming pool. It used to be the Gulf of Mexico was their swimming pool or whatever, okay? And so they're on these tiny lots and they want a swimming pool, and therefore they want to park their cars in the front and all that kind of stuff. And I think our opinion on that is, that's okay, but if you really want that, maybe you shouldn't build it in a historic district. That's kind of the give and take. If you want the charm and the quaintness, well, you got to be a little quaint. You might have
build
to.
a detached garage and have the swimming pool in between.
Whatever, right? There's a lot of options as opposed to just what you'd build in another non-historic spot, so.
Yeah, I think we've seen some on the second floor, haven't we?
What's that?
So I think we've seen some pools on the second floor.
Yeah, I've never seen anybody in them, but,
I haven't either, but.
And in the front yards.
And in the front, with see-through glass,
yeah,
right?
aquarium. Right.
Yeah.
I've never seen anybody in that either, so, right.
Okay. All right, any other questions, comments?
If I just might, because I think that Mr. Mahan was talking about, when he's asking Brandon about 35 feet on 8th Avenue, and I just want, in case some of y'all don't really know this, there's no old structures there that are over 2 stories high. That's the way they built them, so they're significantly lower, with the exception of the Keystone, which is over 50 years old. They have at the back, they have 3 stories on the alley, but I don't even think it's 30 feet off grade. And then there's the Hurricane, of course, which was done more recently, but before we had any of these ordinances and that kind of stuff. And so our thought process was we want to keep, if we want these national historic buildings that still fit in, you don't want to have a 4-story building or whatever next to it.
Of course.
Brandon, I'm going to ask you, and we kind of talked about this before, but when you talk about, and I think you all know this, you cannot build a single-family residence in the CRDEA. Okay, it has to all be commercial, at least on the first floor. And so I'm trying to think of what would be an example where we would have the ground floor not flood-proofed.
So commercial can be elevated. It would probably be more of an office building. I don't know that we would see much in the way of an elevated multifamily or a lodging structure where they elevate for the sake of elevating. But what was brought up before, potentially parking, storage, if they choose to use that lower level, that's always an option.
That would be, to me, that's the only practical matter. I assume if someone was to build a boutique hotel or something like that, the first floor could be open parking.
Right.
So you see into it and stuff, right? Which, you know, to me, in practicality, I don't know if that's going to happen a lot or, you know, especially with some of the size of those lots. So I don't know if we'll really have too many incidences where that might happen.
There's also the possibility of maybe open seating, like cafe seating underneath the building with the actual restaurant and indoor seating above.
And that would be kind of neat.
Yeah.
You know, so, because the one challenge we had a little bit about the height on the CRD is we never quite understood, and I still don't, if you flood-proof the first floor and no one can live there and it's not habitable anyway, why do you then get to build on top of that as well, you know? But I think we've kind of addressed that issue of the height by talking about 35 foot from grade, which is still, remember when we set the drone up there? Most of those places were what, like high 20s or something, except for the Berkeley was at over 40 or something, and you know, there's that whole other issue that didn't exist at the time about permission to build like a rooftop area, and I think now that has to come through you, the city commission, to decide, whereas before it didn't. So I know many residents thinks that, you know, that place was too high compared to the rest of the area there. But I think we've built some checks and balances on that already that help. So, you know, that's why we just talk about 35 feet, because it's already higher. You can certainly build 3 stories in 35 feet. So.
Okay. Any other questions or comments?
You all already have architectural review, correct? You,
Design review.
design review.
The way it's set up right now in the ordinance is that we shall get design review on homes that are being built under the overlay. Homes that are not being built over the overlay do not go to us as a matter of the ordinance, although Brandon and the city has been giving those to us in the last couple of years, so for informational purposes. So yes, but the design review that we have, I think the main things we're talking about preparing this guidebook that will give the builders more examples of what we're looking for in a historic way, and not what we're looking for, but just what the existing structures already that have it. And so I think we'll be able to maybe tighten up some of the new builds to be a little more historic kind of looking than, you know, modern, super modern things. I mean, Pasco's got a lot of eclectic structures down there, so it's not a matter of, you know, trying to tell people what they can build necessarily, but it does need to retain some semblance of a historic district, or otherwise we're going to lose that whole aspect of it, which is going to be a problem for the city, because that's really an attraction, I think. So with the design review, what we're suggesting is that we're going to tighten it up a little bit, not majorly. People are still going to be able to build essentially kind of what they want, but it's going to put them the builders on a little more notice of what we want. And very cleverly, I think, Tara and Brandon kind of switched a little bit of, they have to kind of show us why it fits in, as opposed to us saying, you know, why it doesn't fit in. And I think with most of these people that we've dealt with, a lot of them just don't know. You know, they've built houses in other areas and they come here and they don't really realize there's a little bit of a difference. So, to answer your question, Ms. Robinson, yes, there is a design review. And I think if we eliminate the choices, and I think you all understand that, and only make it under the overlay, then everything would come to us naturally anyway as a design review. And I would just point out, if any of you all have a problem with understanding the issues of having two choices, is there's one set of houses in particular, both new, on Gulfway, and one was built under the regular zoning, just like it was in any part of St. Pete Beach. And then the house next to it, built a couple years later, was built under the overlay, and it sticks out maybe 5 more feet towards the front than the other house. So the first house now has no view off their balcony to the south because there's a house right there. And, you know, and so you're getting that kind of unfairness, really, and it should always be one thing. And another thing we're getting is everyone builds under the overlay because they can build the biggest house possible, and that's just the way it's been going, and that's going to continue that way. So we might as well just kind of accept it and try to make it more uniform. So, I mean, I don't know if any of you had those questions, but that's the reason we thought through this, to do it in that fashion. And I don't know if there's any other areas, if people have questions. I mean, we've spent, if you've read it all and you're happy with it, then that's fine. I mean, that's great. But a lot of it was just cleaning up kind of confusing language, or maybe there's one area where they define something and then they define it slightly different in another area, and it's really just trying to remove some of the wiggle room that may or may not ever be used by somebody, but just cleans it up.
Yep.
And,
Sounds
and
good.
otherwise, yeah, the setbacks and the builds and all this stuff are essentially the same.
Mayor, can I ask a question?
Sure.
And I apologize for coming in late. I honestly have been used to coming in at 4:30, so I do apologize. But I did read the material, and I did want to follow up with a question about the design since you were talking about it. Because even citywide, you know, currently we have a lot of homes. Think of the Don, Bella Vista, and any other area if we go into Corey that are locally or wanting to locally designate. And I think of the Don, the neighborhood where I live, almost the same idea. We see someone purchase an older home, and now there's the biggest thing there ever, you know, overshadowing the homes next to it. And I think I came and gave a 3-minute at one of your meetings about a historic home that was essentially going to be squashed between 2 larger homes. But were you all thinking about that in the design, that it would play into everybody, not just, you know, if you're in and I know in your situation, Paso Groves is deemed historic, right? But that all homes have to meet an architectural standard or design standard, regardless of whether they're in the overlay or not.
Well, we're not empowered on that, if you follow what I'm saying. We're the Historic Preservation Board, so we don't really, I mean, you know, that's up to you all for the other areas. I mean, there may soon be, as you know, there's some movement afoot to talk about the Don Cesar area to be historic, and maybe Bella Vista. There's some grants going on that way. And that would be great if that happens, although I think each one of those is unique in and of itself and different than, let's say, the Paso Grill historic neighbor. You know, it's a different makeup of things. So we'd probably have to have different ideas along that line. But, I mean, yeah, I mean, you know, I mean, like I said, we don't really have the power to look into that. I think at the end of this meeting, one of the questions I do have of you folks is if you all have any areas or ways you'd like us to start looking to change things or move forward or move backward in historic district and try to, you know, do some different things. I mean, people all the time are saying, like, you know, well, Key West, you can't even tear down a historic house, or Charleston, you can't even do that. And it's like, you know, I think it's a bridge too far right now, but I mean, there's all that stuff's out there. And this is a baby step, really, I think, what we're doing today. But it's
And I
kind of-
say it because it's an opportunity. You know, you didn't have, let's say, the opportunity at the beginning when you developed the overlay. You know, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe some of you were there in that process. But Bella Vista and the Don are in the process, right? They just had the final report for that survey. And a lot of the residents, at least in the Don and actually in Bella Vista, have asked, and we had a meeting, I think it was 2 weeks ago, I can't remember, but residents were asking, those who are looking for information for locally designation, well, what standard do we follow? Like, what does it mean? Now I'm locally designated.
Right.
And I want to change something. What guidelines do I follow? And what we said at the meeting was that they're going to look at section, I think we said 20, I think, right? Is that what we said? Something to that?
Yeah, this is 20.
effect. Right. So, but does that apply to the Don, to the Bella Vista, to Corey, or any 50-year-old structure in the city of
Right.
St. Pete Beach? Because they're asking now. So if they're asking now, we should be ready
Yes.
to answer them, right? As opposed to them saying, well,
Well, I think.
I guess
that-
this is what I think, right?
You know, you make an excellent point because, I mean, since the storm, as you know, you may know that we've probably locally designated, 40, 50 houses or something like that. And almost entirely they're in Paso Grill. There's some
In the Don.
Casablanca, there's a couple in the Don. But I know there's 50-year-old homes that got damaged out in other areas of St. Pete Beach, and no one's come in to do that.
They might not know.
Because they have bad information or what.
I think they honestly don't know, because we asked at the meeting,
But I
what
think
happens,
it's
you know?
Resnicki's, okay, I think, and we haven't really talked about this, the default would be, okay, yes, you can be historically designated because if you meet the qualifications, which primarily is 50 years, okay, but not entirely. And then potentially you could get a FEMA variance. But I think then the question you have, I think, is then could you build an addition on that 50-year-old house that looked like a modern addition, which
Exactly.
on the historic overlay, you cannot do that. So we really don't have.
And what character does it meet, right? What's the name, like you said earlier, Paso Grill is different from the Don, from Bella Vista, from Corey, from, North Beach, and there's nothing written, right?
Yeah, I
So
don't-
what's that character?
Yeah, I don't think we've really, that's really come up. I mean, you make an excellent point. We haven't really looked at it in that way, but.
It's coming up, because it's that they're asking.
I can get
Yeah.
that. And we'd have to figure out a way.
But conceivably, this is the Paso Grill Historic Overlay District. That means that there could be a Don Cesar Historic Overlay District.
Correct, yeah.
A Bella Vista Historic Overlay District, et cetera. And they would be developed to meet the needs of that particular neighborhood and the character of that neighborhood. It's not a one-size-fits-all.
No.
That's what we'd be having to develop. At this point, because baby steps have just started in Don Cesar and Bella Vista in particular, we've got background here. So we're trying to get one model working. And when this model starts to work, or we find out what the flaws in this model, then we know how to apply it as the opportunities come forward for the other historic districts and they're being developed.
But, yeah, with that being said, you don't have to be a historic district. I think that's a misconception. You don't have to be in a historic district to be designated historic. But, we talked about this earlier, I think, and I just share this because it's a problem that seems to kind of come up where there seems to be a reticence of a lot of people to get historically designated or do anything because they think there's some sort of downside to it, or they can't sell their property or something like that.
Or get insurance, yeah.
Yeah, well, I don't even want to enter that area. That's an arena I know nothing about and don't want to start with. But, those people that we were talking about this earlier about how if you have a home, an older historic home that you've done a FEMA variance on, so it's maintained its historic look, and when you sell that home, it gets sold like that to the person. I've now bought a house, it's a historic house with a FEMA variance, and if I want to build an addition, it's got to stay within the historic aspect of it, okay? But if you think that out, if I'm buying a house from somebody that's already historic, either I'm going to tear it down because I don't care, or I'm going to keep it historic. So I don't think you're going to find too many people that are going to say, I bought this historic house and now I can't build a modern addition on it. You know, so I think the people that are frightened or don't really have the correct information need to get a little more educated on that, which we've all been trying to do in a way, but it just hasn't really happened. So, but if you said, and Sean said, that's a great idea about start looking towards having, I guess, for lack of a better word, an overlay on these other districts. Have we even, Brandon, have we even got any applications for historic homes outside of?
We have a couple coming through for the Don Cesar. We have several that have expressed interest in other neighborhoods. The challenge is, part of the survey is that we prepare a lot of that historic data for them. We have a consultant who's highly qualified to come in and perform those assessments, and without that, staff has to individually perform those assessments. We have one staff member who does them, but it's arduous. So we may see more as we survey those areas and we have that information.
Right. If the storm had come 1 month later, we might have already taken care of this before that.
I think this makes for a nice template for, for other districts to follow or other areas that get designated. And like you said, if something doesn't work, we have the opportunity to change it, improve it.
Yeah, and I think that's part of what we've done here. The overlay was put together, 99 and then in 2017, but, certainly in 99, things were a lot different as far as the property values and who was building down there and things of that nature. And so, we're growing up as far as that goes, and we have to amend it a little bit to, keep up to date. So there's nothing wrong with the original way it was done. It's just changed and morphed a little bit that we have to take it into account.
I think it's a good proposal, and I think we have consensus from the commission.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Mr.
Brandon.
Mayor, could I, not to interrupt you, could I get one thing clarified?
Sure.
Now?
Yeah.
So just for clarification, what are we doing with the language on the alleys again?
From what I wrote down, we are going to reduce the amendment to 10 feet. We would provide a variance process if they wish to, if they have some hardship.
Clear evidence that they need more.
Correct, yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Can you call
Thank
it
you.
just existing as it exists? I mean, just because there's so many of them, or are you going to call the 10-foot a minimum?
We could say as it exists. I believe based on our analysis, there are no alleyways that are platted at less than 10 feet. I believe they're all at least 10 feet, but we'll clarify that, and it could just be existing platted alleyways
yeah.
would be.
That makes it easy. You don't have to put a number in there, and onus is on them to check it.
Good idea. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Brandon.
Okay, so now you mean to talk about Division 40, or is everybody happy with that, or got questions about that, about the CRDEA? And I would just say that one of the things we've done, we beefed up the language and a lot of the purposes and intent and stuff, so it's pretty clear that there's quite a historic override on a lot of this. But
I don't think that we segregated our questions by section. I think we were just firing off questions, so I think
that's fine. I was only going to say a CRD is not in the overlay, so it's a whole different zoning thing. Okay. I will be quiet.
you have another hour and 16 minutes, so we can take all the time you want.
If y'all don't have questions about stuff, I mean,
Don't poke the bear. Ben.
yeah, I know.
No, it's a good proposal. I mean, we've spent a lot of time on it. So, I mean, we all have, but you particularly have. I think this is our third meeting on this, just since I've been in office in the last 2 years. We've had conversations before, and I think it's time to just move this thing forward and get it passed. I think now is the time to do. We've got a lot of opportunities, I think, down in Paso Grill where people are going to want to rebuild. So I think the sooner we get this out, the better, so that we make sure anything that's new that gets built does follow the new guidelines. so that we have some uniformity and consistency.
We can start working on the draft for Bella Vista and Don Cesar's.
I think if you all want to get together with Commissioner Reznicki, I think that's,
Oh, yeah, you guys have it.
yeah. So,
I can write it, but, I mean, I brought it up because people are asking, and we did have people at this meeting say, I mean, they're gonna come, they think they're coming to you, I think that's the process. If they wanna add, like you said, an addition, whether it's lateral or whatever, they gotta come to you, right? Once they're locally designated, they gotta present to you. Now, when they ask, well, what standard do we meet?
Right.
Do you know how to answer that question? So
There are
that's,
guidelines already in place for that, like what an addition on this style property should look like. It's, you know, most people think it has to look exactly like the house that exists there, and it's the opposite of that. So
Yeah.
it has to be clearly a new addition to the house. So a lot of things are already in place. Lynn Rossetti's a great guide. Brandon's a great guide. When someone initially comes into the office and meets with staff, then they're not sent to us blind, not knowing what their recommendations are.
And if I may also just piggyback on that, and thank you all for your time today. But I think one thing that we as a board have heard consistently and repeatedly is what wonderful assets Brandon, Kristen, Lynn, they have all, every person that's come before us has just said how wonderful they are. And so we're just grateful to have a great kind of supporting team that goes back and does all the work, and then we just get to sit there and hear it out. It's nice.
I will piggyback on that because it is true. And even with everything going on with the hurricanes and people wanting to locally designate, they've all gave great kudos. And to the board, they were terrified to come before you, and then they were pleasantly, well, they thought they would be denied, so that, they thought it wasn't going to be easy. But with the help of the staff and then coming before you, I've only heard compliments of all of what you've all done. So thanks. Yeah.
And I think our design guidebook is going to be a nice little picture book to give people an idea of what they're looking at, what they want to continue to look at and see. It's going to be really helpful.
Yeah, they did one in 2015 that was really good, but they never incorporated it into the ordinance. And so a lot of the heavy lifting is really done already. So it exists out there if y'all want to check it out. But so yeah, the city's been very helpful in the last couple of years in particular. One thing, since if we're just kind of wrapping up here, when I asked earlier about if there's any directions or you think we might want to go, and Ms. Reznicki, I would just call you Betty, but I don't really know you, so.
I won't say what I told you.
Is one of the things, and I don't know if y'all are aware of this, you probably are, but the historic district, is everything south of 32nd Avenue, okay, on Paso Grill. Yet there are areas that are not in the historic district. Some zones are still, mostly commercial zones, are still zoned like they existed outside the historic district. And I think that's an area we're going to need to explore, because even if we get it all right, that all the houses look old and fits in the neighborhood, if we have some massive commercial structures, not even massive, but commercial structures, if people ever get interested in that don't fit into the scale or the size, then that'll ultimately be a problem. So I think that that's a way. We've talked about it already, but we didn't want to bring out too much in this baby step. So,
Right.
anyway.
And we have some that were commercial uses and have changed to residential use, and because they're outside of the district, kind of a little carve out, they didn't come before the board for
Right.
review. So even though
They were
they're
in the
now
Don.
residential,
They were in the Don subdivision.
right.
Yeah, I know which ones you're talking about.
All right.
Yeah.
all right. Is there anything further? In that case, we are adjourned.
Excellent. Thank you all.